Some technical glitches here. Dukkha occurs even in even here. So we're on the 5th week of our 12-week study through the Truth of Happiness book, and this week we're looking at the virtuous factors. And I just mentioned that for most of us, the practical experience of right speech, action, and livelihood, and particularly right speech, is our entry point of a direct experience of the Dhamma. So, and this is just a recap of last week and where we are today. Right view initially is being mindful of the truth of unhappiness and stress, meaning views rooted in ignorance of reality of Four Noble Truths. Clinging, craving, desire, and aversion all cause unhappiness and stress. Right view then brings to mind the possibility of the cessation of stress. That's the initial mundane level of right view, that we've encountered the Buddha's Dhamma, and at least on an initial level, we have actually taken refuge. We understand that a human being figured this out for us. We understand that he left his direct teachings on how to figure it out for ourselves, his Dhamma. And we have that third refuge of a well-focused Sangha. And all three of those are critical in developing the Dhamma. The Buddha often taught that it is important to take that triple refuge, but the significance of a well-focused Sangha. And we'll get into that a little bit later on today about why that is. Understanding the cause of the distraction of stress and the possibility to end stress, and I should say self-induced stress. Right view develops mindfulness of the path leading to the cessation of stress. And when I'm using mindfulness, when the Buddha is using the term mindfulness, he's referring to a refined mindfulness that understands and is able to hold in mind the Eightfold Path as the framework and guidance for Dhamma practice. So it's useful in everyday life to be mindful of what we're doing. If we're driving a car, it's a good idea to know we're driving a car. If we're having a conversation, it's significant to be present with that other person. Whatever it is that we're doing, it's good to have that presence of mind to be aware of actually what we're doing. But that's not the mindfulness that we're talking about. That's the result of a well-focused Dhamma practice. If we grasp after, and I just had an interesting back and forth with an online student, if we're constantly grasping after being in the present moment, we've lost the present moment, haven't we? Because our focus shouldn't be being in the present moment. Our focus should be well concentrated in viewing life as life unfolds from the point of view of right view. And that begins with these virtuous factors. Is that distinction clear to everyone? Okay. Being mindful of right view, right intention develops the presence of mind and the strong resolve to abandon the causes of stress, craving, and clinging. And it's craving for, ultimately, it's craving for and clinging to fabricated views rooted in ignorance of Four Noble Truths. Usually, the awareness of craving and clinging for beginning Dhamma practitioners is the self-referential craving and clinging to objects that are part of the world and seen as external to me as an individual human being. I crave for and cling to my nice house and my new Maserati and my wonderful dog and my wonderful girlfriend or boyfriend, whatever it might be, or whatever else it might be. And as we start looking at craving for and clinging to external objects and events, then we're able to start applying it to internal views and ideas. And it's ultimately, the Dhamma ultimately resolves not through external objects. They're simply a reflection of our craving and clinging. The Dhamma resolves in me recognizing and abandoning my craving for and clinging to all self-referential views and ideas. And included in ideas are ideologies that constantly get us in trouble. We had an interesting talk yesterday on lunch. So this is what we're looking for. We're not looking for salvation from ourselves or from worldly events or from an unknowing or a God that's not yet recognized us. We're looking for liberation from our own ignorant thoughts, words, and ideas. That's what the Dhamma is about. It is completely different than every other system that was present during the Buddha's time as far as so-called spiritual understanding. And it's different than every other spiritual system since that time, religious system, because of that focus.
John, So
Yes, sir.
would it be, I mean, so with that line of truth that we're talking about, everything external is resolved within the first noble truth. I mean, or
Yes. Yes, and it's such an important point. There's 8 factors to the Eightfold Path, but it's the initial factor that is both the entry point into the Dhamma. We talked a little bit more about this last week. That's on the reason I'm saying that. It's on the talk. We can listen to it. That's both the entry point and it's the culmination. There's mundane right view that simply states, reflecting to using the reference to ignorance, I simply don't know. I don't understand who I am in relation to the world I'm living in. And because of that, I create the stress in my life because of that lack of knowledge. So the focus then, from that initial right view, I'm lacking certain knowledge. And again, it's a very specific knowledge of 4 noble truths. Understanding that there might be an orange grove on the other side of Pluto, even if we find that it's true, doesn't mean that I should take the next rocket ship to Pluto, because it has nothing in order for me to gain understanding, because it has nothing to do with the Dhamma, does it? We might prove. Tim might see through his telescope on the right night that orange grove on the other side of Pluto. Great. He's going to be all excited, and he should be, on what he discovered. But it has nothing to do with the Dhamma. In fact, it could be a distraction in many cases, not always. And when I'm making that point clear, I might be a little bit too vague about it. The Dhamma is very specific in what it is and how we apply ourselves to it. And that's the meaning behind 4 noble truths. These truths are truths that relate to awakening. Understanding that there's an orange grove on the other side of Pluto, or that the sky is blue, or that my dog is 65 pounds, they're all truth. But holding those in mind doesn't do anything to me developing awakening. In fact, if I hold those in mind, I'll be distracted away from what's occurring right now, which is where I can awaken. Clear? Yes? It is craving for and clinging to any object, event, view, or idea that perpetuates unhappiness and stress. And it's obvious to that, isn't it? Because we're always grasping after something. There's no happiness. Even in something that might bring us happiness in this moment, a mind rooted in ignorance will now be grasping after more of that, whatever that might be, or something different in order to keep us distracted from stress and suffering. From the stress and suffering that arises from ignorance. It is clinging to all objects, events, views, and ideas that have arisen from ignorance that must be abandoned. And that really is the whole Dhamma. The problem is that we've created, a familiarity, and because of that familiarity, a clinging to these views and ideas that even if we recognize that they're causing stress and suffering in our lives, we tend to cling to them simply because we develop them. There are thoughts, there are ideas. I'm not going to let them go. In fact, you could say that the basis for every argument, and just that doesn't mean that every argument at some point might be useful, but the basis of every argument is that I'm right, you're wrong. My view is right. My view takes precedence over your view because I think it's true. We had a great discussion about this, and maybe we'll get more into it this morning, that there's societal truths that are true simply because a number of people say that they're true. And those truths are different between very different groups. And I don't want to get into all the examples of that. It takes a little bit of reflection on the world to realize that that's true. But just because there are truths in the world that hope to conform people to those views, whatever they might be, does not make them truths in relation to the Dhamma. But to decipher what is Dhamma practice and what is worldly attachment can be and is impossible without the framework of the Eightfold Path, but it's entirely possible with the framework of the Eightfold Path. That's the reason why the Buddha taught an Eightfold Path. So any practice that does not incorporate the Eightfold Path and dismiss any other path or attachment to that path will not work because of that single reason. A mind rooted in ignorance will always be grasping after and clinging to fabricated views rooted in ignorance. The Eightfold Path gives us the ability to recognize that. And as we will see in a few minutes, it is the direct experience of right speech, action, and livelihood that manifests that understanding. Mindfulness as presented in the Eightfold Path is developing mindfulness of all views of an impermanent ego personality. It is craving for objects, events, views, and ideas that support the establishment of an ego personality that initiates craving and clinging. As understanding develops, it becomes clear that preoccupation with views attached to an ego self sustains stress. Once this process is recognized, through renunciation of clinging to those views ultimately, you can then begin to develop samadhi, or non-distraction, or samadhi is another word for a well-concentrated mind. It is a preoccupation with stress that creates the distraction that continues wrong views. In other words, we think that there's, because of a wrong view, that there's something lacking or something wrong in me in this present moment. And so I need to have something more, whether it's an object, whether it's a new car, a new relationship, a new movie. I need something to distract me from this moment, because in this moment, I'm not enough. And that pernicious view, that there's something lacking, wrong, or missing in me is what motivates us to grasp after something else to attach myself to in order to heal myself or make myself more. However that view might be. That's the wrong view. Because who we are can never, ever change. We can have different experiences. We can acquire different things. Some people have a small pile of gold and some people have a large pile of gold. That's just the nature of dukkha. It's described in the First Noble Truth. But when I create a self-reference over what I have and what I don't have, which, guess what? No matter how much you have, you always want more. If I created a self-referential difference between, if I got this pile of gold, I'm probably not going to be happy. But if I have that, I will. You're never happy, are you? Because you get the big pile of gold and that's still not enough. And I'm creating some maybe slightly silly metaphors to make a point. A self-referential ego personality can never be satisfied. It's nature to not be satisfied, meaning it needs to be constantly craving for and clinging to additional thoughts, words, and ideas in order to maintain itself. A calm and peaceful mind, as we described awakening, a fully mature human being is at peace with whatever's occurring. That's the big secret to the Buddha's Dhamma. Wake up and understand that nothing is personal and remain at peace. Maintain a calm and peaceful mind that is at peace no matter what's occurring. And that second aspect of that well-concentrated mind is maintaining its concentration because of the refined mindfulness developed through the entire Eightfold Path. Is that last part clear? Supported by jhana meditation, then the entire Eightfold Path can be held in mind, refined mindfulness, as a way of living in the world in a peaceful and calm way. It is ignorance that gives rise to the belief that our personality is the sum of the self. Having this limited and wrong view of self gives rise to greed, aversion, and delusion. Those are the three defilements always talked about in the Buddhist Dhamma. Out of this mental, physical aggregation, an individual personality arises. The Buddha describes it as 5 clinging aggregates that we'll talk about in week 8. It is this personality that makes choices and takes actions based on attachments and perceived needs. The base need of this ego personality is to continue to define and maintain the ego selves and its beliefs in all objects, views, and ideas. That's clear to everyone, isn't it? It's kind of another way of saying what I just said. It's the job of the self-referential ego self to continue itself. And that's its only concern. That's what it's always doing. Let me skip over some commentary. Mindfulness of right speech, action, and livelihood, the three virtuous factors of the Eightfold Path, shows clearly where attachments to an ego personality have formed. So as we become mindful of our actions, rather than explaining away our actions by placing blame on others or blame on ourselves as responding in a way that might not have been perfect. That's interesting. You use that to reflect that you're inadequate in some way, that you did something poorly, rather than simply recognize this is what's occurred in this life. And then you can learn if there is some part of your behavior that needs to change, particularly right speech or action or livelihood. you have a benchmark and guidance on how and what to change. Is that clear? Well, it'll become clear in just a moment. Some people might question, in fact, we had a great discussion on it. What does define, right speech, right action, and right livelihood? Because depending on what your reference is, what one person considers right speech, another person doesn't. Again, depending on your environment, your influences, and your conditioned thinking. And I don't want to get into explanations of that right now, but I will. The ego self or ego personality is not just a conscious presence, but consciousness influenced by the physical senses. So and what I'm referring to now is if our minds are rooted in ignorance of what's actually occurring, and I'm interpreting life, which is just what we do as human beings, through contact with my five senses and the sixth sense of thinking, consciousness. If that thinking is rooted in ignorance of Four Noble Truths, and that's the vehicle I'm using to interpret what's coming in contact with my senses, I'm interpreting my moment-by-moment contact with the world, and in effect with myself and the people of the world, from a fabricated view. The only conclusion I can make from that fabricated view is another fabricated view. Is that clear to everyone? Yeah. And this gets right back to the heart of right view. If my initial right view is rooted in ignorance of Four Noble Truths, and I don't have any vehicle to recognize that, there's no possible way I can extricate myself from ignorance. Is there? A mind rooted in ignorance, another way of saying a mind rooted in ignorance is a mind that is deluded, cannot recognize its delusion. How could it? Unless it has a frame of reference. That's what the Buddha described in the Nagara Sutta, that remarkable sutta where he described his own discovery of that feedback loop within himself. And so he taught his Dhamma this way. Morning.
That's what we were talking about earlier.
Yeah.
Yeah. I know you just went on to describe it a bit more, but that's kind of my sticking point. You know, it's how to scoop out those fabricated views for me to see what is not a fabricated view. You know, it's anyway, you just kind of gone over it again. I need to go over it and go over it and go over it. You know, it's difficult. It's difficult when you're stood in your kitchen and just going around life. You know, it's difficult to scoop out those views.
Yeah,
of what society.
Scoop it out, because that's just what we should do with it.
Yeah.
That's the entirety of Dhamma practice is right there. That at that point of contact is what I'm referring to all the time. It's at that point of contact between myself and I can say the external world. But even if my reference is to that chair that I don't like the color of, and I wish Matt would get a new one, it's still the thought. It's not the chair. But because my mind is so focused externally, I'm blaming the chair for the way that I'm thinking about the chair. Isn't that ridiculous?
Yeah.
But yet we do that. That's exactly what we do. And we blame other people for how we're thinking about them. We blame worldly conditions, poverty, racism. We take it personally and we blame worldly conditions for it. And we miss the point that even as a worldly condition, as I just said it, as a worldly condition, racism is not to be blamed on the world. It's to be blamed on ignorance, isn't it? Because that's the clear view. That's the right view. So beginning with that question that you just brought, it's that initial right view that something's missing, something's wrong in my thinking, that gets me focused on, okay, how do I change that thinking? How do I that's what the Buddha taught, is how to go. We're right in the heart of that right now. How to take a mind. And think about this. As I started to really understand what the Buddha discovered, it's still entirely remarkable. It just blows me away. What he understood about the nature of ignorance is how a mind that is rooted in ignorance will create very powerful and subtle strategies, incredibly subtle strategies, to ignore its own ignorance. It's included in the word, isn't it? Ignorance requires ignorance. It sounds almost silly to say it like that, but that's the nature of all human suffering, is a continuation of ignorance. that was Siddhartha Gautama's big aha moment, when he put together, as it described in the Nagara Sutta, and then as taught in the Paticcasamuppada Sutta, the primary sutta on dependent originations, that it was that ignorance of Four Noble Truths that led to all manner of confusion, delusion, and ongoing stress and suffering. So the solution, again, isn't out there. It's not to find salvation for myself in some type of Buddhist heaven. It's not to manipulate the world in some way through my ritualistic actions. Because all of those are just grasping after fixing something that's wrong with me, rather than getting to the problem of what is it that's wrong with me? Why was I such a disappointed and angry 15-year-old when I was growing up with no reason to be angry? Yet I was confused. And it persisted throughout my life. And like most human beings, and I'm not putting aside responsibility, but it caused me to act in ways that were hurtful towards myself and others completely inadvertently. I didn't want to hurt myself. I didn't want to seriously attempt moment by moment to drink and drug myself to death before I was 26 years old. I didn't want to, but I couldn't not do it. And all the other things that followed from that type of compulsive thinking that we all are a part of, whether we end up in addictions or not. We're all compulsive about maintaining a fabricated view of ourselves in relation to the world. So the resolution is to recognize and abandon all views rooted in that type of ignorance and abandon them. Thank you for the great question. So this is why meditation alone cannot bring lasting peace and happiness. A great portion of meditation practice and a great portion of modern Buddhism is taught as, and this comes from something called the Yogacara school, which means the mind-only school. It has nothing to do with modern yoga. But the thinking was that all of this occurs solely within the mind, which is true in one case. But as we know, lacking the Eightfold Path, a mind just continually meditating without the right framework and without the right method will often increase its own deluded thinking and in many cases create deep psychosis. I've seen people like that had no real structure for what to do during meditation. They were taught to just go and be quiet, maybe think about something or put your mind on an object, on a flower or a candle. And they create incredible psychoses with themselves. Why? Because they're putting this intense focus now concentrated on rehashing their own views rooted in ignorance of Four Noble Truths. It's just increasing that. And that, I mean, I'm not saying that everybody who meditates with a wrong meditation method will end up like that, but I've seen it quite often. At the very least, you won't develop awakening as the Buddha awakened. So he realized that it's not just meditation. It takes an entire Eightfold Path to develop that type of understanding. Without a framework grounded in right view, meditation can reinforce craving, clinging, and hurtful views arising from an ego self. Due to the nature of conditioned mind, the entire framework of the Eightfold Path is necessary to develop concentration, compassion, and wisdom. The Buddha taught, his words, a true and effective Dhamma practice must incorporate these three trainings. What three? The training in heightened virtue, that's right view and right intention. The training in heightened concentration, that's right effort, right mindfulness, and right meditation. And the training in heightened discernment, or in heightened virtue, as we experience it through being mindful of our actions, our speech, actions, and livelihood. Right speech is the third factor of the Eightfold Path. By mindfully integrating right speech, it becomes clear how words are used to continue establishing a self that is prone to stress, or as an awakened human being, not. Our right speech never causes conflict in the world. That doesn't mean, by the way, that something an individual, the Buddha often said things that were entirely right speech and got a lot of people upset. But the other people became upset because of their own clinging to their fabricated views that were now exposed by an awakened human being. Doesn't mean that the Buddha was engaged in wrong speech. I mean, is that clear? Because we're morphing into a society that says that anytime anybody gets upset, they need special attention, they need a special room, they need special animals to be around them. I mean, that's really what we're coming to, aren't? When the Buddha said, guess what? Dukkha arises. It's part of life. So we're even starting to build into society. I'm not saying we're getting even more diluted, but we're starting to build structures in our society that further remove us from the experience, the direct experience of stress and suffering, and learning radical acceptance of what's that going, rather than there's something wrong anytime I'm upset. Right speech is abstaining from lying and speaking truthfully, abstaining from divisive speech, including gossip, and speaking with compassion for all. Again, sometimes speaking with compassion for all is actually saying so-and-so is acting in a way that's hurtful. That's simply a truth. And sometimes it's important to point those things out, not in a confrontational way or an eye-making way, simply to have a conversation about reality. Is that clear too? So the Buddha was the biggest, he was the most radical thinker. And in some ways, he was the most contentious speaker because he had the courage to talk, because he had the courage to talk against things that would lead people to further stress and suffering. And again, it was common during the Buddha's time. It seems like it's getting more and more common that you can't have that kind of conversation. We're getting to a society that has such a worship of this idea of only positive thinking. And I don't want to get too deep into it, but it's that type of thinking that, I'm not even going to mention it because it would entail much longer. The idea of positive thinking is the most diluted thinking we can say. And we know it for a few reasons. If you follow the Buddha's teaching, it's the first thing that he says is, guess what? There is nothing positive. I said a few weeks ago, and I heard a little, that I don't see anything good in the world. That's the reaction. Oh, there's got to be good in the world. No, because if I insist on finding the good, I'm excluding what I decide is the bad. I don't see anything good in the world, and I don't see anything bad. I just see the world as it is. And because of that, when bad things happen, I don't have to lose my mind over it because I understand it's either part of the environment, an awful tornado that kills 1,000 people, or it's part of ignorance. I used the term before. I don't want to overemphasize it because it is too overemphasized, but the word racism, and it's a good example because we've made great strides in racism, but most people have this thing that we're still enslaving mass people as part of our society. And I don't want to go there, but that's that type of thinking. There's nothing positive in the world, and there's nothing negative in the world. There is just the world, and there is just me in the world in this moment. And that leads me to what is the most important thing to me as a human being in this moment. To awaken and have a calm and peaceful mind that can never be threatened by external events. And how do I do that? I learned a well-concentrated mind. Another way of looking at a well-concentrated mind is a well-protected mind. Why? Because now with a well-concentrated mind, I won't grasp onto and cling to fabricated ideas. Kevin.
Just what you were saying before, how there's this, the positive view thing. I think that it deserves some light on that censorship also comes from wrong view. That's ignorant as well. That's ignorant of the first noble truth, that there are things that are said that are not agreeable. But to just say, well, you can't say any of this, or you just talked about two extreme views there. Everything's got to be positive and nothing can be negative. Well, that's ignoring reality, the utmost, because it's not, people say things and things get said that nobody agrees with. So to limit either one of those is an extreme restricted view.
And that's really what's going on right now.
Correct. I
is
agree with
we have factions that have gotten to the point, we call them political parties for this, but it's not just political parties, that insist that their view is the only right view. If you don't have that right view, you're not someone in disagreement. You're someone who is evil, because you don't follow my views. And we've been doing that as a society. It's getting more and more extreme, but that's what's occurring. Instead of recognizing, but this is where we have a First Amendment in this country that guarantees the right to free speech. The reason why, and that we should never, ever, I'm not talking about we should eliminate it, we should promote it. But we should recognize why we're having so much trouble with free speech by allowing free speech in our society. Because the wrong response then says, well, we should start managing right speech. Maybe we should start eliminating certain speech. And that's where we're going. Rather than recognize the reason why we have hurtful speech in the world is not because we have free speech. We need it to live as free people, don't we? The reason why we have hurtful speech in the world is because we have ignorant people that don't know how to deal with their own freedom of speech. So is the solution, again, is a grand solution to say, okay, as government, we're going to control what people can say and what they should say and how they should say it? But that's where we're moving to, isn't it? Because we haven't recognized that the problem is within each individual. It's not because we need societal structures to manage hate speech or any type of speech. We need the end of ignorance. So again, we can create structures to manage my behavior. There's no freedom in that, is there? And me as an individual. But if I can learn through a well-concentrated mind framed by the Eightfold Path to manage my right speech, my right action, and right livelihoods, the issue is resolved, isn't it?
Yes.
We don't need amendments. We don't need constitutions. We don't need laws. We don't need anything anymore. But we better have them now, because we have people that are full of delusion and full of hatred for each other. We need other structures because we don't have that basic freedom of understanding. And for one, I'm glad we have those structures in place. Some people would argue with me on that. But that's, by the way, that's exactly what the Buddha taught. When the Buddha counseled all the leaders of his time because he was so prominent. And he never said, you can't do this, you can't do that, only in relation to what they should do during wartime. But and there was slavery, there was all kinds of class systems, there was greed and aversion rampant, even in his own house, until Siddhartha's father understood it, King Suddhodana, I guess that was his name is. He understood that is part of the world. He could not change that by directly telling someone, don't act that way, as a moral way of teaching. But he taught the Dhamma. And so even great leaders, like King Ashoka, once they came to the Dhamma, completely changed the way they're thinking. And because of that, they changed the way that they ruled. And they created great peace and happiness for their people that were under their charge. So even the Buddha's response wasn't, we just have to eliminate everything and burn everything down, and you got to abdicate your throne. No, he understood these structures are necessary for society. This is how we act within that fabricated and probably unfair structure. This is how we live peacefully. So then even the people that might at one time think that they're being oppressed and treated unfairly will learn the most valuable thing they can. I'm not oppressed. It's only my views that have me feeling I'm oppressed. And again, I'm not saying that oppression doesn't happen. But even the people that are actually oppressed don't have to live with that self-identity that they're being oppressed. I heard it, I better not go there.
You always do. Come on.
I'm not gonna, no, I'm not.
Right.
It's getting, I heard it, and how do I say this? I'm just gonna say it this way, that wrong speech, ignorant speech always causes harm, even to the people that in my ignorant speech that I think that I'm hoping to save. And I'm gonna leave it there. Because it's rooted in ignorance, it doesn't lead to anything that's helpful towards other people. It just leads to more stress. And again, I'm going to get in trouble with that. We're not talking about the evolution of society. We're talking about how individual ignorance always hurts the person and other people, no matter how altruistic the ultimate goal might be, their ultimate vision. It's still hurtful. And again, the proof of that statement is look at the world we're living in. Look at the world we're living in. And that's just, that, again, it's not good, it's not bad, it's not positive, it's not negative, it's just the truth. And so it doesn't mean that, well, the world is really screwed up, let's get the big bomb and blow it all up. That's ridiculous, because it misses the point, even though some people would almost go towards that, because it misses the point. The point of human life is not to develop a global society that is at peace 100% of the time, no problems, no unfairness, no difficulties. because that's a religious view. That's a positive view. That is rooted in what I just said, that pernicious view of positivity, by saying the world should be a certain way. And it's always, when an individual thinks that way, it's always from their point of view, isn't it? My view of how the whole world should be is going to be quite different, even though it might have some similarities to what other people think. What a Muslim jihadist, who, by the way, has just as right to think the way they think as I do the way I think, would see that completely different. What makes them wrong? What makes a jihadist or a Christian crusader wrong?
My view.
Wrong view.
My view.
Someone else.
It's not the results of their behavior, even though it's awful. I'm seeing it because of my view. And the response isn't, well, we should string those up. We should chop their heads off. We should strive to teach understanding of Four Noble Truths, because that's the ultimate. And in the meantime, as we're developing as a society towards that goal, and I don't think that's a goal of society, I'm just using this as an example. Even if we think that should be the goal, that all of us develop the Dhamma, it's never going to happen. It contradicts the First Noble Truth. But even if that's my underlying feeling, I still have to accept what's occurring in the world right here and right now, don't I? If I'm going to live peacefully. So even though I'm of the view that everybody should practice a Dhamma, I'm not. That doesn't mean that in order to achieve that and feel comfortable in that I have to hate everyone that's not doing that. Because again, that would mean that I'm hating most of the world, because not many people are going to do this. It simply means that I understand who I am in relation to the world and worldly conditions right here and right now. Meaning that the world is always, the First Noble Truth teaches me that the world is always going to prove disappointing. Always. There is dukkha. Let me get going. I don't want to go too much further because Matt's coming in today. Continuing with right speech. Abstaining from abusive speech. Speaking with kindness and tolerance. Abstaining from idle Abstaining from idle chatter. Speaking only when is necessary and helpful. And that's and I think I might stop there. Let me just say this last one, I'm going to stop. Wrong speech arises from clinging and craving and aversion. It is often used to promote or defend the ego personality. I would say it's always used, even though I wrote that. Wrong speech can be very subtle at times. Gossip in particular is always hurtful and always arises from the desires to promote an ego personality. It is best to only speak of others when they are present. That it's best. That doesn't mean that you can never talk about your sister to your brother when she's not here. When we're putting other people down, that's what I'm talking about. Idle chatter is used as much for distraction as for social interaction. A great measure of true friendships are friendships that are maintained without idle chatter. As wisdom develops an understanding that spoken words will actually be helpful to someone or a situation, will always show if they are necessary. Words that have no meaningful impact are part of idle chatter and can often prove divisive and will always be distracting. Right speech also pertains to what we are saying to ourselves and should be considered within the same guidance. In fact, I would say it's most important to that idle chatter we have with ourselves. And that relates to the first foundation of mindfulness. It brings our thinking right back into that eighth factor of the path. In meditation, as we're caught up in those idle thoughts, the internal idle chatter, we remind ourselves, wait, I'm caught up in my thinking, I come back to my breath, period. We don't analyze it, we don't figure it out. We don't start thinking about why did I go so far with that thought. We simply come back to the breath, and that's deepening concentration. And it's addressing immediately the internal wrong speech. As the words we are saying to ourselves truthful, helpful, kind, and compassionate? Are our thoughts a type of unnecessary idle chatter? From the perspective of right view and the direction of right intention, right speech develops to very subtle levels. I'm going to stop there for today. We'll finish that on Tuesday. Yeah, thank you. Well, this is where most people, right speech, I'm referring to, have their first practical experience with the Dhamma besides meditation. Most people will start with meditation, and that's important.
Can you read that last sentence again, please?
Thank you for asking. From the perspective of right view and the direction of right intention, right speech develops to very subtle levels. So initially, and I think you could, on the surface at least, to ask someone, is lying okay? And most people say, no, we shouldn't lie. What about hollering at people in anger? Nah, we probably shouldn't. That's not a good thing to do. And those are true. We shouldn't be lying. We shouldn't be screaming at people. But those are the gross levels of right speech. As we start deepening our understanding of right speech, we get to that point of recognizing the speech that I'm telling myself, the internal idle chatter. As our minds quiet down just a little bit, we start recognizing that. And so as I begin to recognize that, it gives me two things, two benefits, two skills that are necessary in the Dhamma. It gives me the ability, for the first time in my life for most people, to actually start looking at my behavior. Most people say, most people would accept that they've been looking at their behavior and trying to modify it in different ways. But to really understand the cause of behavior that you yourself know is best to change, now is getting down to that level of understanding my own ignorance. And then the other aspect of that is now because I understand it internally. Now when I find me trying to a fabrication is coming up. I want myself to look better in Lorna's eyes than I actually am. So I might say something that's untrue about myself, hoping that she'll believe it. And we do that as human beings, don't we?
Yes.
At times. I've just put us both in a very stress-inducing situation. For one thing, most human beings know when you're BSing. And that puts that other person in a position of either questioning me or, okay, I buy it. And it puts me in a position of maintaining something in this moment that I know is not true. And I've just established myself in the world in a completely fabricated view that now, because that view was expressed through my words, I am now compelled to maintain. By understanding that internally, by stopping that progression within myself, I stop being BSing myself, I stop doing it out in the world too. And because I understand it that way, I also understand when people continue fabrications to protect their own ignorance, because I've seen it in myself. That's where true compassion comes from. From understanding the nature and the results of my own ignorance, and the things that I've done as a result of those result of that ignorance that I'm not proud of, and every human being will say that if they're honest. By recognizing that, I can understand and truly forgive other people for doing that. And forgiveness is an interesting word, because forgiveness does not mean, oh, I see you did something that was really bad, but I'm going to let it go. You just establish yourself as the savior, don't you? True forgiveness is not having the judgment of right, wrong in the first place. True forgiveness is the radical acceptance taught by Siddhartha Gautama 2,600 years ago, and that we're striving to develop within ourselves. And think about that. To have that nature, to have a mind that doesn't have to first go to what's wrong and I'll forgive you or I'll let it go. To have a mind that never picks it up in the first place. That's not nitpicking at the world, looking for things that are wrong or bad. Whether it's simple little things or societal structures that we insist must be different for me to be happy. They're just as damaging. They're just as pernicious. Let go. Right view informs us, and right speech points us to letting go of all views rooted in ignorance of Four Noble Truths. If we truly believe, if we truly insist, and I'll use this term because it's so big, it's so popular today. If we truly insist on a world that is fair for all people, by the way, it can't be, then we'll strive for the cessation of ignorance, because that's the only way that we can ensure it. Don't hold your breath. But I don't mean that as a negative thing. Don't hold your breath, because it's not part of the world to do that. It's the nature of the world, as the Buddha teaches. This is such an important teaching. It's the nature of the world to be stressful. Dukkha occurs. It always will be. But we don't have to be a part of it. So again, two teachings today. Let me go online, and I'm going to ask you again to keep it rather brief. Matt's going to be teaching his wonderful Qigong class in 45 minutes. But let's start online. And ladies first, I think Karen. Yeah, Karen, you're here.
Hi, how are you?
Good. It's so nice to, well, it's so nice to hear from you.
Thank you. It's so nice to hear you today, too. I really enjoyed listening to you today, John. Something that's been coming up for me, and you helped me to see how I'm taking it all so personally. You know, once I heard someone say, it's not personal, even if your name's all over it, you know. I'm going through a situation with a mortgagee on my house that is defaulting, and I have to foreclose. And, you know, a lot of anger has come up around that. And I've realized that I'm taking the entire thing personally, and really her behavior and her situation has very little to do with me. So I just am grateful that I can see it differently, you know, and I don't need to give her the power to make me unhappy about it, you know? So thank you for that.
Karen, thank you for sharing that. That's the essence of the practical Dhamma, isn't it? That it allows you to not lose your mind in a situation that it is prone to that for anybody. That's the common peace that the Buddha talked about is developed no matter what's occurring in the world. So congratulations again, and thank you for sharing that.
Thank you.
Thad, it's good to see you this morning. How are you?
Fine, John. Thank you so much. I have a question here, if I can get it. You know, I'm discovering that most of my idle chatter, the internal dialogue I have, is just that idle chatter and useless speech.
Yep.
And I have a question about how to deal with that. You know, I returning to the breath, you know, following the breath, putting that aside, returning to each breath in each moment. But the Buddha talks about directed thought and evaluation also. So if you have that idle chatter that's maybe recurring again and useless chatter, whatever, is there a way of discernment that because there's this popular term now about spiritual bypassing. In other words, using meditation to avoid something. Just a few words, if you could, about is there, you know, in returning to the breath and that whole process going on, how does one deal with that? So, you know, when you have just recurrent, you know, idle chatter occurring up.
Yeah.
Thank you.
Thank you for the question, Thad. The idle chatter is the internal mechanism for me to maintain my ignorance. In other words, my thoughts are always churning out self-referential thoughts in this moment because I need this moment to be self-referential. So that the practical application of right meditation initially breaks that. It interrupts that ongoing process of maintaining ignorance through my thoughts. And by the way, every time I do that, I find that I'm caught up in my thoughts and come back to my breath. I am taking that direct action to increase concentration by interrupting that flow. That's the definition of concentration. And that supports the rest of the integration of the Eightfold Path that is necessary once that initial level of concentration has been established. Because if there isn't that framework, then my thinking will simply always refer back to whatever I've developed in my own mind. The idle chatter will simply keep coming up because I've done nothing to recognize it and abandon it. It's only useful. And so then meditation itself then becomes a practice of escape rather than a practice of discovery, meaning understanding my own mind. Does that answer your question?
Yes, thank you, too.
Okay.
I think it goes.
Yeah, good. Thank you, Thad. The thing, good to see you this morning. You're only last, by the way, because you were the last one to come on. So. I can't hear you. Hold on.
No, I think you can hear me now.
There you go.
Yeah.
Good
Yeah. Wonderful. Yeah. Very intriguing talk. As usual. This time I'm gonna pass because the time is so short. I like to get others, you know, maybe the new people, because we talk during the week too. So, you know, I have no problem, you know, skipping.
I'm glad you joined us today.
Yeah. Thank you.
I forgot. I didn't ask either of your names. I'm sorry.
Oh,
Anna? Anna and Ava. I may remember them, I may not. But, Anna, what did you think of this morning's class? And do you have any questions?
I thought it was just sometimes the English word, my native language is Korean, but it feels like this is probably the best thing I've done since I moved to Frenchtown a year and a half
Should we
ago.
give her some
So,
applause?
Well, that's true.
And at the same token, I keep thinking about the word. I mean, I know all words in the world are all relative because, again, you said it's ignorance. The idea of the capital I becomes almost like the apex of our existence.
It is, yeah.
And being a mother of 2 young kids, I hate the word molding or shaping them so they could fit into the society, the standard, the norm.
Yep.
And they're so young, and they're like sponges.
Yeah.
They soak up everything, and sometimes I feel as though, based on today's conversation, I feel like I'm the worst mother because I feel I am constantly telling them to be hopeful, to be generous, and yet I'm putting the attachment by saying those things. It's a catch-22. I'm telling them that I really need to be mindful of my own actions and words. But when they do something, especially a 5-year-old who run amok, and I feel guilty for punishing her. But then there's that word, guilt. Because I love her spirit, this luckiness of her being wild and crazy and bigger than life. At the same token, I have to kind of rein her in. That's the word, rein her in. How do I keep her spirit and yet trying to put her on the right path? But she's only 5. So it's like, I'm kind of in flux.
Thank you for your question. And I have to ask you, you're asking that question at your very first class?
I've always, I have a lot of things in mind, and it's, in Korean and English, and
yeah. No, I'm not, it has nothing to do with your language. I'm saying it's such a profound and deep question. My flippant answer would be keep coming and you'll understand it. I'm not going to, I won't say that.
And I named my child.
Within with what we're talking about right here, right speech, right action, and right livelihood, framed by the other factors of the Eightfold Path, can only make you a more effective mother. And it doesn't mean that we shouldn't instill hope in fact, probably a parent's primary role is to install hope in their children. But if that hope is rooted in reality, we're also protecting our children from great disappointment. And the only way and those are all abstract ideas. There's nothing concrete. And so there's nothing, we can't buy a box of understanding and give it to our children. Yes, but if you really want to, the only thing you can do is develop the Dhamma and example it to them, which is just what the Buddha did. You might be interested, send me an email and I'll send you a link to a sutta where the Buddha is teaching his 7-year-old son, Rahula. And it's just remarkable in what he's simply teaching him mindful behavior, but he's giving him an entire Dhamma teaching. So I can tell just from looking at you that you are likely doing all this already. And you'll have, I was talking to someone, might have been Kevin, one of the wonderful benefits of developing the Eightfold Path is this inner poise that I've developed and the self-assuredness now that I don't have to second guess my thoughts, words, and deeds anymore. And by the way, we always do that until we get to this point. I didn't realize I was doing it my whole life. Always having this person looking over my shoulder, is your behavior perfect? All of that falls away when you realize that you're acting within the framework of the Eightfold Path, because you know the only thing you can do is at worst remain neutral to people, and you're providing the opportunity for even a 5-year-old to flourish in. And so that is, so my long answer was the same as my short answer. if you keep coming and start developing an ever deeper mindful presence for your children, you're simply a better parent.
So I was telling my husband that I was brought up in Korea until I was 14 and a half. I was brought up by a single mother.
May I ask, South, I assume, right?
Yes, yes.
Okay.
She practiced Pure Land Buddhism.
Mm-hmm.
So she used to take me to the temple. But she lived in a different world, not I call it pious living, or but then again, by me saying that, I'm already judging my mother who passed.
Maybe, but maybe it's also true, isn't it? If you have a judgment of your mother because of her lack of piousness, that's one thing. If it's simply a description of who she is.
No, but she was pious in spirit, but not in terms of her choice. She didn't have a choice. And her way to provide sustenance, keeping me. Anyway, sorry, I don't want to get into it. But so I came here to Frenchtown thinking I came here to unlearn everything. Everything that I was taught. I'm 56 years old. So, and I'm sorry, I don't want to.
No, this is why we come together as a Sangha.
And again, I feel like there's a survivor of guilt because my mother died at such a young age, and I came here with the young children, trying to provide them the kind of haven. I know that's kind of an odd concept. For them to experience the simpleness of life and being able to, my way of protecting them from where I come from, the child that I come from. But then again, I'm already putting that much burden on my children because I am outwardly, whether I know it subconsciously or unconsciously, that I'm already giving them that much weight. And I don't want to feel them to feel that kind of weight as they get older because of my lack of understanding, my own ignorance. Does it make sense?
Again, Anna, you're expressing yourself beautifully.
Well, I'm sorry. I don't want to take everybody's time.
Yeah, well, so let me, again, I'm going to go back to the same answer. Reflect on how you just said what you said. You are, and I'm not judging you about this. You are judging yourself harshly because of your conditioned thinking.
Yes.
That it would be unreasonable to expect that you would have any different type of thinking based on your experiences. And that's not theoretical. You are the practical example of that. You've had certain experiences in your life, some described in the First Noble Truth as stressful and maybe very stressful, that have formed the way you think about yourself, and in particular, this most relationship you have with your children. And the only thing that you can do about it at this point is accept it. Why? Because it's what's occurring. You're going to learn as you continue, and I hope you continue to join us, you're going to learn the profound difference between approval and acceptance, because you're struggling with that now. You're thinking that you need to approve of yourself,
right,
when the view of yourself to yourself is disagreeable or disapprovable, I might say.
Right.
We start where we are. You start where your thinking is. Even that type of thinking, which, by the way, is a wrong view. It's not true in relation to Four Noble Truths.
Right.
But you can't get past that unless you first radically accept, this is who I am right now, and this is where I hope to get, which is developing a calm and peaceful mind that no longer reacts to the world, and is that living presence of calm mindfulness as an example to your children.
Right.
And if you weren't here right now in this moment in your life, that wouldn't be possible. And I'm saying all that to point you to this notion that you should be feeling pretty good about yourself, because right now, and this is not a promise of a miracle, it's a promise from experience, that if you continue doing what you started today and with Matt, you will very quickly get to that point where you are a very self-assured mother, because you're knowing you're doing the best you can in an environment that is prone to stress and suffering. So the cruelest thing that we can teach our children is too much hope. Remember, I'm not saying no hope, but too much hope, meaning everything is wonderful in the world. But a 5-year-old doesn't need to hear, not everything is wonderful. Guess what? There's these other awful things. It's simply to be a mindful presence and don't over exaggerate the world. And again, this is from a direct experience. I grew up with a mother, and my mother she really was the most incredible woman I've ever met in my life, except Lorna. She was just a remarkable, if you could call a woman a Renaissance woman, that was her, even though she was mostly a mother her whole life. But she believed in the power of positive thinking. I even remember listening to WR radio when I walk home from school, 3:30, and there's Carlton Fredericks. Nobody remembers. Anybody remember Carlton Fredericks? He had a radio show for many years on WR radio, The Power of Positive Thinking. And this was how I was kind of brought up, that everything is wonderful. And it's such an awful way of living, of teaching kids. But I don't blame my mother for that. I don't even blame Carlton Fredericks. I blame the environment that supported that type of thinking. And I understand that my mother's motivation to teach me what in essence could be very stress-inducing for me was rooted in the intention to be loving and compassionate. And how could I hold anything against that?
I feel like a big faith knowing the kind of child that I had, and then trying to instill the hopefulness, the world, the possibility of how amazing this world is. Knowing, it's like one extreme to the other, and trying to. I feel like I'm walking on the double-edged sword, and at the same, and I know I'm doing it. That I am mindful of when I'm. It feels like sometimes I feel like a shell because I know everything, but what comes out of it, and trying to instill that to my children.
I don't mean to cut you off. What you're describing is you don't have any self-assuredness. You're judging yourself and questioning yourself way too severely. And the judgments, and not to get too deep into this, the judgments aren't rooted in reality, even though they reflect your life. But they're reflecting a view that was conditioned by your life, not actually what's occurring. And so it brings us back to what you most need to do, based on what you're saying, is to develop the Dhamma, because then you will continue to be who you want to be to your children. And it's what. Do you mind? I don't see well. I have macular degeneration. Okay, sure. Can I use this just to see what your face looks like? And
sure.
Well, I don't want to hear like this.
I'm like crying.
I just. Thank you. I just wanted to get a look at you. Anna, you have begun with Matt and now here to develop a realistic view of your life and your children. And that will only continue to bring a great peace and calm to you. And I think wonderful children. So,
thank you.
Yeah, thank you. Thank you for being here. Anna, what do you have to say for yourself? Welcome to our Sangha. Pardon me?
Ava.
Oh yeah, Ava, I'm sorry.
Yeah.
You're gonna hear that a few times. I'm gonna call you Anna probably 3 or 4 minutes.
That's okay.
I don't know so much of what Anna said resonates with me. I have 2 little kids as well. I mean, motherhood, love aside and all the obvious things, is such a cocktail of like hypocrisy and like realizing what person am I, and now you're kind of like worried of transferring that whatever you view as negative that is in yourself onto your kids.
Yeah.
But at the same time, like there's just a way of not doing it. I don't know. So you're trying to like tone it down, but then you realize maybe I'm being fake. I don't know. It's just
You might be.
It's a lifelong process.
Thank you, Ava. You're bringing up the same concerns that Anna has.
To each other.
Well, there you go. So you talked yourself into this situation.
I forced
one way to look at how the world has developed through ignorance is seeing ignorance as a disease-causing agent. And what you are both describing is you don't really see it this way yet, but I think you will after today. Is how do I stop introducing this ignorance into my children's lives? And the only way, in other words, to infect them with ignorance. How do you do it? You do it by living within the Dhamma. And that sounds almost too simple, but children take their cues from their parents, don't they? And if their parents' cues are framed by 4 Noble Truths, that's what they're going to learn. And it really is that simple. And I'll tell you something, and I'm talking from a person who's never been a parent. I was in parental situations a few times. So it's not from direct experience, But knowing how minds work, it can only be a benefit to your children. And yet they still might not make it. You take to the Dhamma today, and 20 years from now, your child will be 25. They still might not make perfect decisions all the time. It occurs even within children. So we do the best we can. And now you're setting yourself up to do the absolute best you can. Both of you, just be very, very gentle with yourself. If this is something you want to do, then please continue. Come to our classes, and you'll simply be better parents. Your questions will be answered. That being said, you've been to the website.
Yes,
So if you're just starting out this meditation, start with short periods of meditation twice a day. There's all kinds of information on the website. I don't want to get too deep into it now. Ram's ready. He's got to go. Welcome to our Sangha, and I hope you continue to come. Ram, you have something to say before you run out?
No, I'll say it on Tuesday.
Okay. I'm glad you're here. Lorna, we have a little bit of time. It's 5 after 10. So let's go around the room, but we'll do it quickly.
Sometimes I've learned an awful lot today. An awful lot of the stuff that really matters about how I spend my time thinking about in wrong view, time making, etc. I can really, I think, take a new appreciation of it needs
I just want to see if you were smiling.
It takes ignorance to maintain ignorance. I think
Yeah.
I've kind of like
Yeah.
taken a new dive into that this morning. And in my thinking that I think is wrong view. And that's what I'm doing.
Yeah, that's-
I'm maintaining my own ignorance. And I haven't really seen that before today.
wow.
So that's kind of like a big revelation to me. If you just see that maintaining throughout the day, maintaining my own ignorance. So that's going to be a really helpful thing. And also we have the phrase, this is not me, this is not mine, this is not who I am. I've heard it very frequently. I know it. Sometimes you just know it and understand, but you don't really get it or can really apply it in the way that you're meaning it. And I think I can see a deeper meaning into that, to the point of putting it into practice in my day-to-day living. So that's good too.
Thank you. That's the essence of practice in this moment. Recognizing that if I'm stuck in a self-referential view in this moment, to extricate myself from that view, I'm going to pass over you for a moment and come back to you, because you're the one that I won't feel bad about cutting out at the end if I have to. Julia, good morning.
Oh, good morning, John. I just wrote a little thing about right speech. Right speech is the outward and inward modality of the same commitment to what is real. To realize truth, our whole being, inward and outward, has to be brought into accord with actuality, with things as they are, which requires, in communications with others, that we respect things as they are by speaking truth. Truthful speech, right speech, establishes a correspondence between our inner being and the outer phenomenal world, allowing wisdom to rise up and fathom their real nature. So I kind of like the inner outer aspect of that whole of right speech, because it's an inner. By the outer you can see what the inner is.
Yeah. Thank you. That's really profound. What you're really talking about is and just to use a word, the morality of right speech, because it is the moral thing to do for me to speak accurately and clearly about what's occurring in other people within the framework of right speech. In other words, that stuff of idle chatter, and to say things that will, an aspect of right speech is to say something that is actually meaningful, that will have the impact. So to tell a bank robber to stop stealing with the knowledge that they're not going to stop stealing is idle chatter, isn't it? society would say, well, that's a good thing. Gives, give suggestions like that.
Yeah.
But I know,
Outside Band-Aid.
yeah, and it's only causing aggravation to me and probably to the bank robber. They don't want to hear it. So that is right speech is not just telling the truth. It's having the wisdom and the inner morality, the inner ethics to know what to say and when to say it. You said that better than I just said it. So thank you.
Thank you, John.
Good morning, Michael.
Hi, John. I'm gonna take a shot at this. See how it goes.
Just tell me, that's good.
Just give me a minute. Who am I? I am. I am not labeled that society has attached to me. I am not my thoughts. I am not my words. I am not my actions. I am not my reactions. I am not my sorrows. I am not my moments of joy. I am not what I do. I am not what I have done. I am not defined by where I am or where I am going. I am not what I feel. I am not all that I have experienced or all that I will experience. I am not defined by what I like. I am not defined by what I dislike. I am not defined by all that I own or by which I don't have. I am not someone defined by an illness, whether physical or mental. I am not my emotions. I am not that which has occurred to me at any time in this life. I am not defined by what I will do tomorrow or what I failed today to do today. Who am I? What am I? I am a mind united in a human body in a phenomenal world. Simply stated, I am liberated from the stress and suffering of ignorance and freed from the endless cycle of death and rebirth.
Wow.
And
Thank
it's
you.
out of here.
Yeah.
Grand slam
Thank you,
for
Michael.
Michael.
Could can you two folks give me a ride home, by the way, after
Sure.
class? Great, thank you. Forgot I needed to establish that. Becky, good morning.
Good morning. I'm going to be very brief. I just want to say, John, your talk today was fantastic.
Do you want me to look at you?
It
Especially when
was-
you're giving me praise.
I mean,
Could you say that again? No, I'm kidding.
It really just resonated and brought you to a place where you could really think about and really understand what it means to just have that right view, and to hear you explain it with such enthusiasm was just remarkable. I really enjoyed listening to you. And the only other thing I have to say that I don't know if it's a more practical area or not, but I find that right speech is frustrating. Sometimes I just feel so compelled to make people feel better by saying something that I know is going to make them feel better. And it's very, and I know I'm aware I'm doing it. I know I'm doing it. It's very hard not to do it because it usually results in a just noble silence.
Yep. Yeah.
But the couple of times, the few times I have been able to do it, I've realized that what that noble silence does is either from you or from them might inspire the direction to go more toward the truth, more toward the truth of the moment of what's happening.
Yeah.
So the more you can do that, the more you realize that it's going to bring you to the truth.
Yeah. Well said, and it resolves the problem of how do you have the knowledge of the Dhamma and yet speak to people in a way that doesn't encourage their further ignorance. And it's simply by responding through the Eightfold Path and from that understanding.
That concentration to just know that you're doing it, that you want to do it, know that it's the easy way out, really, and
just mean mollifying people by everything's going to be okay.
Stopping and not doing it and just letting noble silence take over and see where it goes from there.
And that's the application of noble silence. It's not just it's not another ritual. Right now I'm in noble silence. I'm in noble silence in this moment because I don't have anything that fits in the right speech. So it's the action of being mindful of right speech that informs noble silence, not well, I'm going to decide that I'm not going to talk anymore. That's not noble. There's nothing noble about it. But that's how it's often presented on so-called Buddhist retreats. We're going to have 10 days of noble silence. There's nothing noble about that. Okay. Noble in this moment is by me being mindful of my right speech and realizing I have nothing useful to contribute in this moment. And so I'm going to maintain a calm and peaceful mind and keep my mouth shut. That's right speech. Thank you, Becky. Tim.
I'll be fast. That's what I said. Right mindfulness, the concentration factors, right mindfulness, right intention, allows us to apply right view and the wisdom factors to integrate the virtue factors in the right way in accordance of the Dhamma. Understanding and knowing what is right speech, action, and livelihood, and release from my passion or reaction to any external or internal impermanent phenomena. Again, using dispassion to all entanglements and detaching from the ego.
That is it's as you were saying that, Tom, I wasn't just focused on you. I'm sorry, but I was just thinking about it. The Sangha is remarkable. You know what you're all reading, but you're getting right to the point of this profound understanding that the Dhamma resolves within me is the whole point of the Dhamma, and you're all expressing it. But that really got to that. Thank you, Tim. It's beautiful. All right. Good to see you. No class next Saturday. We'll be up on retreat. I'll put it in the email though. Good morning, Kevin. You got 8 seconds.
What makes you think I got something to say?
Let me see. Yeah, you do. You look like.
Well, I just think agreeing with everybody that this really points back to the Dhamma resolving within oneself, and I think that right speech and the virtuous factors, as Tim just said, I think we can be informed by right intention a lot when we think about right speech, because there's a lot in right intention. That's really one we have to look at. The intention to abandon craving and clinging to all worldly phenomenon, impermanent worldly phenomenon. And if we can think about that, that will inform our self-talk, which is really a view, which will inform our speech. And if we're not abandoning the craving and clinging to worldly events, all impermanent phenomenon, that describes the process of I-making. And if we're not willing to abandon I-making, we're not going to notice these things. And yeah. I was thinking of a little funny thing is that I-making, I mean, wherever you want to I-make, you're going to run out of parking. You're going to have to go check it out. You're going to run out. It's going to come back, and it's going to be, where's it going to go? Yeah. Where does it resolve? In the self. So I just appreciate everybody's comments and
that's a great way of putting it.
To that.
Yeah. There's no parking for ignorance in the world, even though we keep trying to do it.
The meter's up.
It doesn't fit. Yeah. That's beautiful. All right. There is no class next Saturday. We'll be on our teachers retreat, but that'll be in the email. And we'll, for next Saturday, unless you're coming to Tuesday's class, which will be the second half of this class, for next Saturday, you'll be reading the sixth chapter, the 6th week of it. And Anna and Eva,
yes,
on the website, the copy of The Truth of Happiness is on the website on the front page. Have you seen it? So
I kind of browsed through.
Okay.
Yeah.
So it's there. It's available. But I also have some copies here too. So, but again, I'm not trying to sell copies. Just go to the website. All right. We'll finish with a quick metta. This is what should be done by one who is skilled in goodness and knows the path of truth. These are the Buddha's words on metta from the Karaniya Metta Sutta. This is what should be done by one who is skilled in goodness and who knows the path of peace. Let them be able and upright, straightforward and gentle in speech, humble and not conceited, contented and easily satisfied, unburdened with duties, and frugal in their ways, peaceful and calm and wise and skillful, not proud or demanding in nature. Let them not do the slightest thing that the wise would later reprove. Wishing, in gladness and in safety, may all beings be at ease. Whatever living beings there may be, whether they are weak or strong, omitting none, the great or the mighty, medium, short, or small, the seen and the unseen, those living near and far away, those born and to be born, may all beings be at ease. Let none deceive another or despise any being in any state. Let none through anger or ill will wish harm upon another. Even as a mother protects with her life her child, her only child, so with a boundless heart should one cherish all living beings. Radiating kindness over the entire world, spreading upwards to the skies and downwards to the depths, outwards and unbounded, freed from hatred and ill will. Whether standing or walking, seated or lying down, free from drowsiness, one should sustain this recollection. This is said to be the sublime abiding. By not holding to fixed views, the pure-hearted one, having clarity of vision, being freed from all sense desires, is not born again into this world. Thank you all for a wonderful class. Thank you online. Peace.
Thank you, John.
Thank you, John.
Yeah, Matt has a class and just shortly, so let's pick up and